Again, my name is Alicia King. I am the host this evening. Daisy is my colleague in behind the scenes. She organizes everything, makes sure everything goes well. So thanks for letting us know where you're joining us from. And then also, you know what I'd love to know? I would love to know what's your most favorite fall migratory bird? Do you have a favorite migratory bird that that you watch for in the fall? And I'm seeing a whole bunch of New Mexico joining us, New Jersey, Chicago, all sorts of, we're like all over the place. So as you're thinking about that, what's your favorite fall migratory bird that you might see in your area, wherever you are? All right, so as everybody gets settled in, lets us know what their favorite bird is, I just want to give a quick overview of Environment for the Americas. So Environment for the Americas is a nonprofit organization focusing on bird conservation and really connecting people to nature and bird conservation. And we do that through a variety of ways. There are a lot of different things that we do to share information about birds, to gather information about birds, to talk about conservation, to get people really interested in birds and their conservation. We work with local organizations, national organizations, global, international organizations. We gather data. We do local surveys, participate in surveys at all different levels. We attend conferences. We create educational materials and do a lot of community outreach. And so our educational materials and community outreach is done in multiple languages. Most specifically, it's usually French and Spanish. And depending on sometimes our focus and our partners, we'll do other languages. We also do a lot of programs where we engage students and young people to serve as conduits to talk about birds and their conservation through internships. So we have internships with the Forest Service, with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and also with the National Park Service. And the students that we work with and the interns that we work with get a little bit of a stipend. We help pay their expenses, and they bring us back so much valuable information. So it's incredibly important for us to be able to do all of these sorts of things so that we can continue to learn, spread the news, and create new programs that help us understand birds better. One of the things that we really are well known for is our World Migratory Bird Day celebration. And World Migratory Bird Day is not just one bird day. It's not just one day. It's whenever celebrations can be held, whether it's fall or spring. A lot of spring events happen up in North America. A lot of fall events happen in Central and South America. As we think about the way that birds migrate, that makes sense. And so this year's theme has been insects, and really thinking about the celebration of the phenomena of bird migrations, calling for action, and what birds depend on, many birds depend on, and how it's helpful to create an ecological balance. So we've had a lot of fun with insects, protect insects and protect birds as our theme this year. And because we're a nonprofit organization, and again, I'm a volunteer for Environment for the Americas, we do a lot of things that help raise funds. We have, you can become a friend of ours. You can go to our website and join us, our friend. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter X. You can follow us on many different social media platforms and through our partners' social media platforms. And you could also go shopping with us. I mean, what a great thing to do. Help support conservation by going on a shopping spree. So Daisy manages our shop online and physically in our Colorado home, but we sell all sorts of cool things: scarves, mugs, stickers. Our educational material is all available actually online and some of it in the store. So you should take a little run around our mall, our shopping mall online, and see if there are some things that might be of interest to you. And that's one way to support us. So I am going to introduce you to Trish O'Kane. And I am holding up the book that that Trish has written, one of several books. And if we can see this, and for those of you that join us on a regular basis, you know my typical thing, I read the books and then I find things that are of interest, and I have all these little sticky notes in places that are pretty compelling and questions that I have for the author. And this one in particular is jam-packed full of stickers because I have a lot of cool things to share and to ask about. So I want to just read a quick little bio from the book about Trish. And Trish spent some time in Madison, Wisconsin. So as I was reading through this, I was like, oh, I know where that is. Oh, I know what she's talking about. So I'm super excited to be able to share some of that. You got a hot mic again. So Trish O'Kane, I want to share though that she says she's an accidental birder. And as we talk about some of the things in her book, we'll talk about that. But she's a writer and a senior lecturer in environmental justice at the University of Vermont, where avians are her teaching assistants. And she talks about that quite a bit through the book. A former human rights journalist in Central America and the Deep South, she has written for the New York Times, Time, and the San Francisco Chronicle. She lives in Burlington, Vermont with her writer husband, their dog, and 3 chickens. So that's Trish O'Kane. Welcome, Trish, to the Environment for the Americas Bird Club.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And it's, unfortunately, I have to report it's 2 chickens now instead of 3. We lost one of our hens to ovarian cancer. They're fascinating birds. They are birds. That's something I've learned about chickens. We think of them just as items in the grocery store, but they act like birds. They roost in trees and do all kinds of weird, fun things. I'm so honored to speak to your group. I lived in Central America for 10 years. I lived in Nicaragua and Guatemala. And also I got finished a master's degree in Mexico. So what happens to people in Latin America and what happens to the birds is very important to me. I was a human rights investigative journalist in Central America for those 10 years. I worked for the United Nations part of the time. I was part of the United Nations Human Rights Mission in Guatemala. We were verifying the peace accords. That was from 1992 until 1998. I lived in Guatemala. I lived in the highlands most of the time. I lived in Huehuetenango in a place called Parillas, very near the Mexican border. And I really love Guatemala very much. I also spent time in the Yucatan and in Chiapas, as well as Mexico City. So I love what you're doing. When I lived in Latin America, I was not interested at all in birds, as you will know if you read my book. It was all human rights. It was all Homo sapiens. And I still care very much about human rights. And I'm very interested in how your group navigates the political situations and the dictatorships, and how I admire how you have people in on both continents and how you negotiate that. But at the time when I lived in Central America, I barely noticed the birds. I'm ashamed to say that now, but I was investigating cases that were so important, and I was deeply inspired and still am inspired by my friends in Nicaragua and in Guatemala who were trying to change their countries. And that experience is probably the most important experience of my life. And I'm deeply grateful for it. So it's an honor to talk to your organization, because you do work in several languages and that you are trying to build bridges between between our continents. So thank you very much for what you do, because it's not just about the birds or the humans, right? You're trying to do it. You're trying to do both, which is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that we've had great success with is that we do work locally, in other countries. And it's not us coming in and deciding what needs to happen or what's going on. It's the people living in those communities that are actually doing the work and doing the on the ground education. So it's phenomenal. And it's such a pleasure to have you here, Trish. So, folks, if you have questions or comments as we're moving through tonight's Bird Book Club, please put them in the chat. Would love to call on you if you have questions for Trish. And of course, as those of you who have joined us before know that I always have questions. I always have things that I want to talk about. So I do. I'm really keenly interested. And I forget, I was looking, who did the illustrations in your book?
So the cover was done, HarperCollins is my publisher. They have a person in Los Angeles, Vivian, who did the cover, which is very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful to her. I'm sorry, I can't remember her last name right now. That's terrible, but it's in the acknowledgments. The person who did the illustrations inside the book is Valerie Downs. I worked with her after I left Central America. I moved to Alabama to work in Montgomery at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I was a hate crimes researcher for several years, and Valerie was their graphic designer. She's won international awards. She had never drawn a bird before. But I knew, because I know her so well, when we worked together, I as a journalist, her as a photographer and illustrator previously in a very different realm. She knew this story, and I knew that she would be able to do the drawings. And if you see the birds in the book, they just have personalities, because she's not coming from, it's scientifically correct. I mean, the birds, you can tell who the birds are, but she's not, they're different from scientific drawings, because she is drawing them from the perspective of the story and the birds as agents in this story and as the stars of the story. So there's just a different perspective and feeling to those drawings. Yeah, she's incredibly talented
Well,
illustrator.
that's what I noticed as I was looking at them. I was like, there's personality in
Yeah.
them. And it matches as I was moving through, it matches your storytelling so well. So I wanted to do a shout out for whoever the illustrator is, because it was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. I will let Valerie know that.
Yeah. So I have another question for you about how you decided, and for those of you that have written books or worked with publishing companies, when we write books, we don't always get our way. We don't always get to do what we want to do. We don't always get to choose all the pictures, and we don't always get to like capitalize the bird names that we might want to. I mean, there's just lots of stuff that when we work with publishers on in this aspect, we don't always get to do everything. But it looks like you did some great work with your publisher here, and I'm wondering, you have some really cool names for your chapters. And then you also have quotes, and quotes from some people who I recognize, in the birding community. Tell us a little bit about, how did you decide to, in your story that you've told, and I love the way you kind of weave in your personal memoir-y stuff along with the birds. But how did you decide on the chapter titles? And then how did you decide on the quotes that would accompany those? And did you reach out to the people you chose? Well, some of the people that you chose to include their quotes.
Wow.
That was like 3 questions in one. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. First of all, I'll start with the last part of it. I did reach out to ask permission. I mean, some of the people, obviously, some of the quotes are very old, 1840s or whatever. Those
Yeah.
people are long gone, so I didn't ask their permission. And hello to everyone who is joining us, especially from Latin America and the Caribbean. It's so great to have you. Yeah, so I did ask permission. Of course, I got permission. The chapter titles. Oh my God. It wasn't hard. It was like poetry. It just came to me that this is the theme. And I'm very lucky. My publisher is wonderful. HarperCollins is the second largest publisher in the world. I mean, they're a huge machine. But my editor, Sarah Murphy, is incredibly talented, kind, wild about this book, and her assistant, Rachel Sargent, did just as much work. I have to give credit to my agent, Barney Karpfinger in New York. He was a midwife, and he helped me from the very beginning with everything, crafting. I mean, we did a 120-page book proposal together to sell this, and Barney was just as involved in it as any editor would have been. So I had a lot of help, an amazing team. But the titles just came to me. I just knew that like the first one, Strange Teachers, because I'd thought a lot about, my father's cancer as a teacher, when one of your parents becomes very sick, what you learn when you realize they're leaving this world, and all of a sudden, oh my God, I really am an adult. I'm not a kid anymore, right? And that was a teacher. And then the Hurricane Katrina, as a teacher, because I had not thought about environmental issues until my house was underwater. And then it was like, hello, you're such a dumb shit. I mean, come on, right? And then I guess the birds as strange teachers, because I'd never really noticed birds before the hurricane. I mean, I noticed them, but very peripherally. They weren't important to me. So like that theme just came, and the other ones just came out of the writing itself. You write, and suddenly something jumps out at you, and that's the theme. The quotes. I'd love to collect quotes. I read voraciously, and I have so many quotes collected, and I love Wendell Berry's work. He's the tobacco farmer. If you don't know Wendell Berry, his poetry, his writing, Wendell Berry, read that guy. He's like, I don't know, he must be close to 90 years old. And he's still protesting and trying to protect the earth. He is one of my great heroes. So I was determined to get some quotes in from certain people I admired very much. And I wish I had more quotes from people in Latin America. I admire very much the work of Eduardo Galeano. I think I quote him in there somewhere. And I would have loved to have quotes in Spanish, but hopefully the book will be translated into Spanish. It is being translated into Mandarin and South Korean at the moment.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think, as I read your book and the story that you were telling, it was so compelling. And one of the things that I did really enjoy was how you weaved into it the story of your kind of, where you were living, what you were doing at the time, and the connection of the birds. And you write about, and in fact, I don't know how many folks have the book with you, but in the prologue, you write that you never paid any attention to environmental issues. You said, I simply did not see the connections. But then life took a sudden wild turn. Everything fell apart in a single day, a matter of hours. And there was life before that day and life after. And in that life after, you found the birds. Can you kind of describe, and you do talk about this throughout the book, but how did that connection feel? I mean, what was the deep part of that connection that with the birds? Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, it didn't. I mean, part of it came from a deep sense of shame when I was standing inside my house after Katrina. It was 40 days later, we were allowed back. And I just, when I saw the devastation, and also I saw how things I had bought and used had poisoned the land and the water. And I had not been conscious of that before. Now I think about how can I live in a way that's biodegradable? I mean, the water's rising everywhere. You know, I'm in Vermont. We've had flooding the last 2 summers in a row, serious flooding. My basement's got mold in it. You can't keep things in the basement here anymore. Water tables are rising all over the state. So this idea of living in a way that doesn't harm our water and all the creatures that live in it. So that was a consciousness first for me because of the devastation I saw. It wasn't the birds I saw in New Orleans. It was a horror movie, right? Like, and anybody who's lived through a hurricane and people from the Caribbean know what I'm talking about, right? Because so much crap goes into the water and so many things get destroyed and people die and it's pretty horrible afterwards. But the birds came in really because my father was dying of cancer and he was in California and I was in New Orleans and I was flying back and forth to see him. And my father loved birds. He was, you know, he didn't have a college degree. He didn't know what the birds were, but the ton of birds in California, especially he loved hummingbirds. And he had hummingbird feeders in front of the windows. And he was getting weaker and weaker. He had stomach cancer. It was terminal. I knew he only had a year at the most. And so I was visiting him. And one day we were sitting, and this is in the book, we were sitting in front of the window where he liked to sit, and he had his feeders. And a hummingbird came to the window and looked in at us. And my dad said, "The feeder's empty. The birds come to tell me the feeder's empty." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, right, Dad, whatever.
Whatever.
The bird's talking to you." And then flew back to New Orleans to teach after the hurricane to help rebuild. And my students were very distressed. It was a really hard time. I was having a hard time. The news was terrible. That the news was that the soil was poisoned and the water was poisoned. And, you know, I just thought, my God, where are we headed as a species? I was in deep distress, and my students were in deep distress. And so I thought, you know, my dad's sitting there every day and now he can barely walk, but he's watching his hummingbirds. Yeah, I should go out and get a bird feeder. And that's what I did. And that bird feeder saved my life and got me through that semester, you know, and a cardinal. I mean, there's many stories, but really it was my father watching him start to die and watching how he's still be able to take care of something and enjoy beauty. And he gets such pleasure from these little birds. And that's where something clicked in my brain. Like, I need help. I need
Mhm.
help. I need to do something to help myself get through the day and teach my students in New Orleans because they're suffering and they're scared and they're saying, "What's our future?" Right? And I thought, I can't go into class crying and a mess. I have to walk in there strong and in a good mood. And okay, maybe the birds can help me do this. So every morning, sitting out there with a cup of coffee, and I see people nodding, and you can relate to this, right? Things are bad. The planet's that's not looking very good right now for us as a species. But you see that bird and it changes your day. And maybe it gives you the strength to keep fighting, right? And so it was my father. It was, you know, he was dying, but he was still teaching his children how to live.
Yeah, and you talk about that quite a bit in the book. You know, you mentioned it. You mentioned it a couple times, and you also talk about stress and how birds can bring you some of that peacefulness. We do have a question in the chat about the program that you initiated, and of course, being in Madison myself, yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to find out who's doing your program in Madison so I can go witness it, or be a part of it, or figure out how do I help with it. So tell us a little bit about the program that you initiated, how that started, and then, yes, of course, answer the question: is it still going on in Madison, and or where is it going on in other places?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's still going on in Madison, and it's at the university. And a woman named Anka Koiser, she was a graduate student whom I trained when I left Madison. She's doing the program. I think they go to Warner Park every Wednesday. I'm not sure if the children are from the same school or how it's structured, but they are doing it, Alicia, so you can go. So yeah, that program's been running now since 2010. The program struggled during the pandemic, as all school programs did, right? But I think she's definitely doing something. Brown University copied my model, and the program's running in Providence. I went down there 3 years in a row to train. A history teacher started it. The program in Providence is in Spanish and English. They produced a bird field guide to Providence in Spanish and English, which is fabulous. That was a student project. So here's how it started. Again, like the whole bird thing for me, it was an accident. I left New Orleans and I moved to Madison to get a PhD in environmental resources. I had no science background, but I wanted to understand what is climate change and why did Katrina happen? Why was it so terrible? Why did so many of my neighbors drown? And as coming from a human rights perspective, as a human rights journalist, I was interested in the human intersection in justice and environmental injustice, right? Why did so many people die? And that this was not a natural disaster. So I go back to school, I move to Madison, and I move across the street from this gorgeous park, Warner Park. And it's full of birds. So I took ornithology, and I'm sure many of you know what happens when you take ornithology, right? It's like a conversion experience. Your life changes completely and you go off the deep end. Well, that's what happened to me. And my 1 hour a week of homework in the park turned into 1 hour a day, and then 5 hours a day, and then weekends and nights owling. And then it took over my life. And it's been the same ever since. That started in 2008. That's when my life changed completely. So while I was in this park, I was birding happily for 2 years, loved it. And then one day a neighbor said to me, a neighbor who is a star in this book, an elderly lady named Hetty Jacobson, who is 90 years old, still lives on the edge of the park. I just saw her in March when I went to release my book in Madison. She said to me, Trish, she said, I heard that the city is going to build a sidewalk through the meadow. And you're studying ecology. Why do we need a sidewalk in the meadow? Do you know anything about this? She said, I'm too old now to go to public meetings at night, and I'm afraid of falling. Can you go to the meeting and find out about this? And I thought, well, I don't know why they want to do a sidewalk through a meadow. We already have a sidewalk around the park. That's dumb. But, honestly, I kind of didn't want to go to the meeting. I just wanted to go birding. I just wanted to find 100 birds. I was up to like 88 or something in Warner Park. And I also had an attitude about local politics because I'd worked for the UN and at these high levels, I thought school boards, local politics, that sounds kind of boring to me. Terrible attitude. I am ashamed to admit it. I'd never been to a local meeting of anything in my life. That's the truth. So I went to this meeting and I asked about the sidewalk. I just raised my hand. It was a little neighborhood meeting. Hey, what's with this sidewalk in the meadow? Oh, that's just a city plan. They make all these plans. Nothing ever happens. Don't worry about it. I go home, I Google the plan, 165 pages, and a long chapter dedicated to that park. Selective cutting in the woods, take out the thicket where all the birds were and the deer. And I was horrified. I couldn't sleep that night. And I just thought, oh my God, this park is going to get concretized. It's going to drive away all the birds. And I had discovered at that point, almost 100 species, and over half of them were long distance migratory birds, neotropical migrants. I mean, in an urban park. This place is amazing. So I was horrified, and that was the beginning of the struggle that's documented in the book. So the children's program, what happened was I ended up in a big fight. You'll read about it in the book with neighbors, and we ended up in all these meetings, 5 years of meetings, over 150 hours, 15,000 words of testimony, just me and my husband and a group of neighbors. We stopped all of it. We stopped all of it. And now eagles nest in that park. The eagles had 3 eaglets this year. It's a great story, but as all of you know, from protecting habitat wherever you live, it's not easy. and it's very wearing, but the birds give you your joy. So the children's program came about because I ended up in some very contentious meetings. The city councilor was pushing this plan. She really wanted it for good reasons. She wanted to help the neighborhood because my neighborhood, there were kids who were in trouble and there were no programs for them. And so she wanted to use the park, build stuff in the park for the kids. So after we fought a bit, I emailed her and I said, would you have coffee with me? I'd like to talk to you. And to her credit, even though she was really mad at me, she met with me and we had coffee. And I just said, look, I care about my neighborhood. I'm not just a white elitist Patagonia wearing birder, right? Because there's this whole thing with the environmental movement. And I wasn't an environmentalist. And she said to me, look, she said, you can't just go to meetings and complain. She said, you're a graduate student. Your park is surrounded by kids living in apartments with no yards, and there's no environmental programs in your park. She said, you're at the university. Why don't you do something about that instead of just complaining? And I thought, okay. I don't have kids. I don't know anything about kids. I've never done education before, environmental education. I'm just barely learning the birds myself. I said, okay, well, I'll think about it. I'll go talk to the university. I'll try. I don't know. And she said, and you better go to every public meeting after this. I want to see you at neighborhood. I said, I'll be at every neighborhood meeting. I promise. So I go to a neighborhood meeting and there's this principal, new guy, principal comes from the middle school, a mile away from the park. His name was Mike Hernandez. He happened to be from Santa Ana, California, where I was born and raised. And he says, I'm the new principal. He's a hero in this book. I'm going to turn this school around. It's got a lot of problems. He said, and I need your help. I need the neighbors to help. I need tutors for these kids. And I thought, oh God, middle school? Hormones, crazy kids, video games. I don't know anything about kids. I can't work with middle school kids. I want little kids, calm, sweet, adoring, quiet, right? I thought, no, middle school, no, no. So I went home, I thought about it for a week and I thought, you know what? You do what needs to be done. You do what your community's asking you to do, not what you want to do, right? And that advice came from a Jesuit priest I worked for in Nicaragua for years named Javier Gorostiaga. And he was one of my mentors, one of my most important mentors in my life. And I went home and thought about Javier and what would Javier say to do. And I thought, suck it up, go work with the middle school kids. So I went and met with the principal and I said, look, I thought this is crazy, but let's see what he says. I'll set up a class at the university. I'll teach students how to go birding. I'll bring them to your school every Wednesday. We'll walk to Warner Park. I'll pair them one-on-one with your kids as mentors. If your kids are interested in birds, and I thought, they're not going to be interested in birds, but I'll try it. And he looked at me for about a minute and he said, I get the bird thing, Trish. My sister works at Cornell. He said, let's try it. That was 2010. It started with, I think, 5 or 6 kids. Within 4 years, 98 children signed up. Thank God only half of them showed up that year. It was wildly popular. I'd like to say because of the birds, but it wasn't because of the birds. Some of the kids liked the birds. It was because of the college students and that one-on-one relationship. The kids adored their students. They still adore them. I just took my group out yesterday here in Burlington. I do the program every Wednesday. And this was our second week yesterday, just second time. And some of the kids are already holding hands with college students. It's relationships, right? And I'm sure all the people I'm speaking to all over, it's about the human relationships with our neighbors, our elected officials, it's that. So that's how it started. And it is in 3 places. And I get every month or two, I get a request. I'd like to do it here. Somebody wants to do it in Iowa. I just spoke in Iowa a month ago. I was the speaker at the ornithology. Yes, I see Kiki. Thank you. It's like a big brother, big sister program. Yeah. But my students learn as much or more from the children then they teach the children. Because this is the beauty of the program. My kids live in my neighborhood, the kids we work with, and the college students are 5 miles away. They don't know this neighborhood. So they come here to walk with the kids, and the kids know the neighborhood. They become the guides. So it reverses that kind of missionary saviorism thing that's so rampant in so many of our organizations, in which I seek to fight and teach my students. We gotta watch this in all of ourselves. And me being raised Catholic, growing up white in the United States, this is something so ingrained, especially in Catholicism. So I really try to teach my students, but the kids teach the students. They teach them. Don't feel sorry for me. I'm going to climb to the top of that tree and show you where the eagle is, or whatever, right? And that happens every week. It just happened yesterday. I mean, it's so much fun.
Yeah,
I go out 3 hours with them every Wednesday. It's always the best 3 hours of the week. Almost always.
You, Trish, you have such a great storytelling capability, and I'm seeing people, not everybody has read the book that comes, that joins us for these bird book clubs, but a couple people who put in loving the story, such a great story. And if you love what Trish is saying now, you're going to love the book, because it's fascinating. And again, Trish, the way you weave these stories in, and the way that you touch that human relationship and the relationship with people. You talk a little bit about stress, you talk a little bit about the things that everybody has going on with their lives, and you never know what somebody else is going through or what they're experiencing. And people have a lot going on, and those common threads that can connect us through those bird stories is a big thing. And you've got people like Carmen is saying, the story about the young man whose mom was dying or had died was really touching. And so we don't always know what people are going through, or just what's touching their lives. And sometimes those bird events can be that stress reliever, and that ability to be able to just not have to deal with the ick that's going on. And I just want to make sure I catch some of the things that are being said in here. So we do have a question. Deborah has a question. Deborah, do you want to ask your question, or do you just want me to read it?
It's fine if you read it.
Okay. All right. So in the book, you provide several examples of the link between mental health and nature. Mm-hmm. How do we best get this message to decision makers who ask, why is it important for the city to be bird friendly? And what are the tangible results?
Gosh, Deborah, I am so deeply frustrated about this. I speak about it. I'm in Burlington, Vermont. All right. Bernie Sanders is my senator. We have a wonderful school board, a good friend on it. I don't understand. Well, part of the problem, I think, is universities, and I work at one, right? Okay, so in academia, we do all these studies. Why isn't the science getting translated into policy? If we have mountains of studies showing that this is good for children, I'm just trying to change recess policy in Burlington, Vermont. There are kids who don't get outside at all, and their school is surrounded by gorgeous woods and a park. That's crazy. That's crazy. So I don't have an answer for you. Well, here's one answer. I think we need a federal mandate in the United States that mandates that kids will spend a certain amount of time outside every day, every child in the country. That's a human right. And I recommend to you, I don't know if some of you know of the no rules recess principle. You could Google that later. No rules recess principle. He's in New Zealand. So New Zealand is an international leader in this. And this principal years ago, I make my students watch this video. They can't believe it, this YouTube. He years ago, his school, there was a lot of bullying, public school in New Zealand. And he decided to have an hour of recess and let the kids go outside with no supervision and do anything they wanted for an hour. And they did all kinds of crazy stuff. Stuff we in this country would never be allowed, right? Because of lawsuits. And because we don't have a national health system. New Zealand has a national health system. So a kid falls out of a tree, breaks an arm, it's not going to bankrupt the family, right? So there's all these social factors. But anyway, watch this. This guy became an international sensation and bullying decreased. It plunged in his school, and cognitive scores and tests and all that went way up, because when the kids came back in, they were ready to sit down and read and listen. So I show that here. I just showed it to my students a week ago, and they said, oh, that could never happen in the United States. That's dangerous. So we have to change attitudes. But here's what I would like to see. A federal mandate, it has to come from the top. And Vermont, for example, has it's not a law, it's a recommendation from the health department that every child spend 45 minutes a day outside. But it's just a recommendation. It's totally toothless. And a lot of the schools, my kids here at this school now, they're outside with me. They're going to a middle school that has no recess, and it's right next to a gorgeous park across the street. No recess. They're demanding recess. It's insane. So then what happens? The kids go crazy. They don't want to sit still. So then they are stigmatized. They are pathologized. And then what do? We gave them drugs. It's a national scandal. We could solve so many problems right now in the United States just by getting the kids outside, letting them get outside, liberating them from the prisons of their little desks. But I am frustrated. I have been trying for years. I'm hoping that my book, if it gets to higher levels, I will be able to talk to some of the people behind these policies. That's my goal. Because we're making our children sick. I see it every week.
Thank you very, very much. I just want to add one point. And I'm from Canada, so there's a marvelous program called Naturehood. Which is it's run by Nature Canada, which is nonprofit, funded by the federal government. And just Google it, have a look. They've got things like lessons in a backpack. They share their resources across the country. There's some really excellent stuff going on there. It's just sort of getting that into it's more after school programs. It's not into the school yet, but yeah, I was just curious, and I really love what you're doing with the kids and the university students, just embarking on something like that with pollinator gardens tomorrow. So loving your chat.
Thank you. Good luck with your pollinator project.
You know, Trish, you talk about this a little bit, and again, picking up on you don't have to be an ornithologist. You don't have to be a big birder. You don't have to be anybody famous. You can be any one of us, here on this call or in this book club. But you share examples in all of your stories that you tell in the book on how you are making a difference. And it was asked, well, how do I make a difference? And how can I bring this to people that it matters? And you were saying you hope to put this book in the hands of people who can make decisions or who can do things. And one of the things that I would encourage folks here to do is to think about, well, first read Trish's book. It's fascinating and full of ideas and full of, oh yeah, okay, she doesn't know kids. She doesn't hang out with kids. She's got all this other stuff going on in her life. Oh my God, she lost her home. It was, she lost neighbors. She had to move. When you moved from Madison, when you moved to, I think it was you moved to Vermont, and you were like looking outside your apartment at a parking lot instead of the cool park that you had been in front of earlier. All those things take a toll on us. But one of the things that I can recommend for folks here in this Bird Book Club is to think about Environment for the Americas and the educational materials we have available, and think about whether it's World Migratory Bird Day, or you just decide to do something like during the Great Backyard Bird Count weekend in February, or, you know, something. You could go to a school and offer to do a bird walk, or, you know, do a presentation of some sort, or, you know, read a story, or connect with people. So we have the tools through books like Trish's that, you know, go through things that are very real life. I mean, she's an accidental ornithologist by the, you know, bird watcher. She didn't sign up for that. But, you know, we do, I think, start small and, you know, think about just what's one way that you can impact your neighborhood school, your neighborhood Girl Scouts. You know, maybe they need to, you know, could go on to a bird walk, and you could help them earn a badge. And the materials that Environment for the Americas has, you know, could be something that helps you with that. So lots of opportunity to get engaged, and to think about how, you know, how can you do some of the stuff that you know that Trish is talking about in her book. And then I want to make sure that I capture some of these comments in here. So Carmen is saying, I think it's Carmen. You got a couple people in your room, Carmen, but she's a pediatrician, and she completely agrees with you, Trish. And then Kiki also is a pediatrician, and the lack of, she said, do you want to say what you wrote, Kiki, or do you want me to read it? Or
no, I was just saying to responding to Carmen's comment about, you know, the lack of, you know, kids being outside, like what Trish was referring to. We're so quick in the medical fraternity to just label them without really looking at what's the need, what is lacking, before we're ready to label them and medicate them without addressing their needs. It's very unfortunate.
I see this, Kiki, and it disturbs me because the kids are labeled. I had a whole group of boys last year in 5th grade. They're labeled, you know, difficult, challenging. There's all these words, right?
Yeah.
And they're kind of channeled into, oh, those are the bad kids, right? And I have to fight it in myself when I'm talking to my college students, like, well, you know, there's this group of boys and they're a little boisterous or whatever. It's already affecting how I feel about them. And then we get outside and they're fine. They're fine, right? I mean, and I was one of those kids. I was hyperactive, always in trouble in elementary school, in the principal's office. So you know, they just need to get outside. So in Grenada, you have the same issues.
No, not as much, thank God. But we now have a lot of screen problems now because of COVID, we did a lot of like online school. And so like everybody, you know, the Ministry of Education even gave tablets to all the kids. And so it's really concerning because even in my office, we have literally 6 months old cannot even sit up properly without support. And the parent sometimes has the phone in front of them with the nursery rhymes and stuff. And research has shown that the language development is not very good using screens. You need the natural human interaction. So when they come and they say, well, my kid is not speaking much, not talking, or that's the first thing I say, are you reading for them? Are you talking to them? How many hours do you have them in front of the screen? So we have this thing in our culture worldwide now about screen time and sitting. And so now that compounds a problem when the kids can't go outside and get some nature. Like forest bathing is so important. They've done research, but it's unfortunate. So thankfully people like you are bringing this more to light, and hopefully we can make some changes.
Yes, and I'm encouraged. Several states in the United States now are starting to ban phones in the schools. California is doing it. But you're right about the screen time. I have 4th and 5th graders who can hardly read. I mean, they're already way behind, right? And that's because they're not sitting at home and the parents not sitting reading. And my parents read to me. They didn't have a college education, but I had books and they read to me. And that you're absolutely right. These are things we can change.
Yeah, thanks for that conversation. And I think that is one of the things that you talk about in your book. And Trish, I think you mentioned in your book that the impact you personally have. And when I think about the impact that we all personally have, and somebody wrote in the chat, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly who it was, coffee and birds every morning. And
Oh, yeah.
simple little things like, what kind of coffee are you drinking? Are you drinking coffee that comes from a sun plantation, or are you drinking coffee that comes from shade grown, environmentally friendly, trade friendly, bird habitat coffee that benefits the local farmers and that is home and habitat for birds? So one thing that you can change in your daily habit is, the things something that you do every day. I'm drinking songbird friendly coffee. But Trish, you mentioned that you have like 4 bikes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, after Katrina, I had a little truck and it wasn't working very well. So my husband and I, we evacuated in his car and left my truck behind, which was of course really stupid because it was underwater it was 12 feet of water. Yeah, so that was the end of the truck. And I just felt so sickened by what I saw and the poisoning. And there were like 250,000 cars that drowned in New Orleans, and refrigerators and televisions. It was gross. And I just thought, I can't walk into a car dealership and buy another car. I didn't have money anyway, but I can't do it. I don't want to do it. So I walked into a bike shop and bought a pink New Orleanian Cruiser. That was my first bike. I still have it. But I bike in the winter in Vermont. I have a bike with spike tires. And of course, I'm privileged. I live in a place where there are bike lanes, and I don't have to rush around with, getting children or helping, my elderly parents. They're gone, so I recognize not everybody can do what I do with a bike. That's not a solution for everyone. We need public transportation. And something you said, Alicia, I think is important. It's good to these individual solutions, but it's absolutely not enough. And in my book, I do emphasize flocking, building a flock. Everything in the book that I say that I didn't do by myself. It was with my neighbors. We organized. I did nothing by myself. That would have been impossible. And so I really believe it's also more fun, right? You make friends, and I could never have done any of it alone. So we need it more than ever after COVID. We need each other. Yeah, but yeah, I love biking. I'm a big cyclist. Did we lose our host?
Well, I'm here. So if you demand, I'm here, Trish. Thank you. I don't know. Yeah, maybe we lost Alicia for a minute, but
Okay.
thank you. Yeah. We're supposed to be ending in 2 minutes.
Okay.
If
Okay.
anyone has one more question before we close the session, but it was Alicia ask again. Sorry, but yeah, if you have any question, we're almost done. Thank you, Trish, so much.
Oh, well, no, thank you to all of you and for what you do. The birds are leaving Vermont now and they're headed south, and I think some of them are heading to you. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful to think about that, right? Sending love your way and our birds, and thank you for taking care of them. They're your birds too. They unite us, right? That's something I love about the birds. They're beautiful feathered bridges. They transgress. They don't have passports.
No.
They have to go through a border and a border patrol. The birds, we've got a lot to learn from birds.
And
Right?
let's work on light pollution as much as we can. So switch off your light because we have a lot of migration.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes.